Every morning, Marcus reaches for his smartphone before his feet touch the floor. He scrolls through carefully curated feeds, choosing between 3 breakfast options his grocery store algorithmically suggested, then selects clothes from a wardrobe influenced by what his culture deems professional. By 9 a.m., he's made dozens of decisions, yet none of them were truly his own. Marcus doesn't realize he's living inside what philosophers call the architecture of choice, invisible cultural scaffolding that shapes every decision we make without our conscious awareness. This isn't science fiction. This is the reality of how culture operates as an invisible hand, guiding our choices through mechanisms so subtle they feel like personal preference. Today, we're diving deep into the philosophical foundations of how societies construct choice, why your decisions aren't as free as you think they are, and most importantly, how understanding these invisible traps can actually liberate you from them. The question isn't whether you're being influenced, you are. The question is whether you're aware enough to choose your influences consciously. Liberation from invisible cultural traps begins with what philosophers call metacognitive awareness, thinking about thinking. This doesn't mean rejecting all cultural influence, which is impossible and undesirable. Instead, it means developing the capacity to recognize when your choices emerge from conscious values versus unconscious cultural programming. The first step involves what I call choice archaeology, excavating the cultural assumptions beneath your preferences. When you feel strongly that something is, obviously, right or wrong, that emotional certainty often signals deep cultural programming. Ask yourself, what cultural narratives make this choice feel inevitable? What alternative ways of framing this decision exist in other cultures or historical periods? Consider Miguel, who realized his intense drive for career advancement wasn't personal ambition but internalized cultural messages about masculine success. This recognition didn't eliminate his professional goals, but it allowed him to choose them consciously rather than feel driven by unconscious compulsion. He began evaluating opportunities based on alignment with his examined values rather than cultural expectations. To understand how culture controls choice, we must first examine what philosophers call the paradox of freedom. Jean-Paul Sartre famously declared that humans are condemned to be free, yet sociologist Pierre Bourdieu demonstrated how our freedom operates within what he termed habitus, deeply ingrained cultural dispositions that make certain choices feel natural while others seem impossible. Consider the concept of time itself. Western cultures have constructed linear time consciousness, where efficiency and productivity become moral imperatives. Elena, a project manager in Berlin, feels genuine anxiety when she's 5 minutes late to a meeting. She experiences this as personal failing, not recognizing that her emotional response was culturally programmed. In contrast, cultures with cyclical time consciousness, many indigenous communities, for instance, view punctuality as secondary to relationship maintenance and situational awareness. This isn't about right or wrong approaches to time. It's about recognizing that what feels like natural emotional responses are often cultural constructions. The invisible trap isn't the cultural norm itself. It's the illusion that our response to it is entirely personal and unchangeable. Culture operates through what anthropologist Clifford Geertz called webs of significance, interconnected meaning systems that make certain choices feel inevitable. These mechanisms work through 3 primary channels: symbolic environments, social proof cascades, and what I call option architecture. Symbolic environments surround us with meaning-laden cues. Walk into any modern coffee shop and you'll encounter carefully constructed symbolism. Exposed bricks suggesting authenticity, handwritten menu boards implying craftsmanship, ambient lighting creating intimacy. These aren't accidents. They're cultural engineering designed to make you feel like choosing their premium coffee aligns with your values of authenticity and quality. But here's where it gets philosophically interesting. The trap isn't that these symbols influence you. The trap is believing your response to them reflects your authentic self rather than your cultural conditioning. When David chooses the artisanal coffee over the chain store version, he's not expressing his individual taste. He's performing his cultural identity within a system that equates consumption choices with personal values. Social proof cascades create the illusion of collective validation. When everyone in your professional circle uses the same productivity apps, attends the same conferences, or espouses similar views on work-life balance, these choices feel naturally correct. The invisible trap lies in mistaking cultural consensus for objective truth. Recent neuroscientific research reveals how culture literally rewires our brains. Dr. Shinobu Kitayama's cross-cultural studies demonstrate that people from individualistic cultures show increased activity in brain regions associated with personal agency when making choices, while those from collectivistic cultures show heightened activity in areas linked to social cognition and contextual awareness. This means culture doesn't just influence what we choose. It changes how our brains process choice itself. Maria, raised in a collectivistic culture, experiences choosing a career path differently than James, raised in an individualistic one. Maria's brain naturally weighs family expectations, community needs, and social harmony, while James's brain prioritizes personal fulfillment, individual achievement, and self-expression. Neither approach is superior, but both individuals might believe their way of choosing feels natural and right. The invisible trap emerges when we assume our cultural programming represents universal human nature rather than one possible way of organizing consciousness. The most sophisticated invisible traps operate through what economist Richard Thaler calls choice architecture, the way options are presented to influence decisions. But this extends far beyond marketing into the fundamental structure of economic and political systems. Consider the concept of homeownership. In American culture, buying a house represents success, stability, and the achievement of adult status. This cultural construction serves specific economic functions. It ties people to locations, creates debt relationships with financial institutions, and generates ongoing consumption of home-related goods and services. The invisible trap isn't homeownership itself, but the cultural narrative that equates it with personal worth and life success. Similarly, our political systems present choices within predetermined frameworks. When citizens debate whether to increase or decrease government spending, they're operating within a cultural construction that assumes growth-oriented economic models. Indigenous cultures might frame the same discussion around seven-generation thinking. How decisions affect descendants 7 generations in the future. The invisible trap lies in mistaking our cultural framework for the only possible way to think about collective decision-making. Perhaps the most insidious invisible trap is the belief that access to information equals freedom of choice. Modern culture celebrates being informed consumers and engaged citizens, yet information itself is culturally filtered and framed. Take the example of Rachel, who spends hours researching the best smartphone. She reads reviews, compares specifications, and feels confident in her informed decision. But the entire framework of her choice, the assumption that newer technology is inherently better, that individual ownership is preferable to sharing, that constant connectivity enhances life quality, remains unexamined. The invisible trap isn't her specific choice, but her unconscious acceptance of the cultural values embedded in the choice framework itself. This extends to larger life decisions. Young adults choose college majors within cultural narratives about career success, personal fulfillment, and economic security. They might carefully research different fields, but rarely question whether the entire education career consumption lifecycle represents the optimal way to organize human potential. Developing choice consciousness requires specific practices. The first is temporal distancing, imagining how future historians might describe the cultural assumptions of our era. What aspects of our normal life might seem as strange to future people as medieval social hierarchies seem to us. The second practice involves cultural perspective taking. Before making significant decisions, consciously consider how someone from a dramatically different cultural background might frame the same choice. This isn't about adopting their perspective, but about recognizing that your initial framing isn't universal or inevitable. The third strategy focuses on questioning emotional certainty. When you feel that a particular choice is obviously correct, pause and examine that certainty. Strong emotional conviction often indicates deep cultural programming rather than objective truth. This doesn't make your feelings invalid, but it reveals their cultural origins. Here's the philosophical paradox of choice liberation. Complete freedom from cultural influence is neither possible nor desirable. Culture provides the shared meaning systems that make cooperation and communication possible. The goal isn't to escape culture but to choose your cultural influences consciously. This creates what I call meta-cultural agency, the ability to navigate between different cultural frameworks while maintaining awareness of their constructed nature. Sarah, an international consultant, consciously adapts her decision-making processes when working in different cultural contexts. She's not being inauthentic. She's exercising sophisticated choice consciousness by recognizing that effective choice requires cultural fluency. The liberation comes not from escaping invisible traps but from seeing them clearly enough to choose which ones serve your examined values and which ones constrain your growth. The invisible traps controlling your choices aren't conspiracies or manipulations. They're the natural result of living in meaning-making cultures. Recognition of these influences doesn't diminish their power overnight, but it begins the process of transforming unconscious reactions into conscious responses. Marcus, whom we met at the beginning, still reaches for his phone each morning. But now he pauses for a moment, recognizing this impulse as culturally constructed rather than natural necessity. Sometimes he still checks his feeds, but increasingly he chooses to begin his day with practices aligned with his examined values rather than algorithmic suggestions. The goal isn't to make perfect choices free from all cultural influence. The goal is to develop sufficient awareness that your choices emerge from conscious engagement with cultural possibilities rather than unconscious submission to invisible traps. Every choice you make today offers an opportunity to practice this consciousness. Not every decision needs deep philosophical analysis, But developing the capacity to shift between automatic and examined choice creates genuine freedom within the constraints of cultural life. Your choices shape who you become, and understanding the invisible forces shaping your choices is the first step toward consciously directing that transformation. The traps remain invisible only as long as we refuse to look for them. Thank you for joining this exploration. If this perspective on choice and culture resonated with you, subscribe for more deep dives into how cultural forces shape human experience, and share your thoughts about which invisible traps you've noticed in your own decision-making. The conversation continues in the comments, where your insights contribute to our collective understanding of these fascinating dynamics.